and see who is going to be the best for the OIC Youth Debate Championship. So without any further, I would like to leave the floor to our head judge of today, Mr. Defrim Shabanaz from Albania, to first give feedback about the topic as well, and also open the debate. So Mr. Defrim, the floor is yours.
Okay, testing. Can everyone hear?
Yes, Mr. Defrim, we can hear you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So just a small check on the teams, starting with the team government is here. In team government, we have Indonesia as proposition and Sudan as the opposition. Are all the team members of the Indonesia here? Since we are on the live stream, I would suggest those who have a good internet at least to open the cameras, and those who have middle internet to open the cameras during the speech. This will make sure that we have a more entertainment debate. Now, without further ado, I'll be announcing the motion, and the motion reads as this. The media in nascent democracies should reduce the coverage of government failures. On the side of the government, we have Indonesia, and on the side the opposition, we have Sudan. So if we are all set, we are ready to judge. Now, together with me, we have Ms. Tasneem. She's also have been with us all this during the, this tournament. And then we have Ahmed Kutuja, if he can hear us. And we have...
I can hear
Ahmed.
you, yes.
Yeah, perfect. And we have Miss Noor on this as well. And lastly, but leastly, we are 4 or 5 judges. Do we have the anyone from Secretariat judging with us, or the chairman of OIC?
No, unfortunately, for the time moment, we have just only 4 judges, which is Ms. Tasneem, Mr. Defrim, Mr. Ahmed Taran, and Ms. Noor.
Okay, so with all this, all of this step, I think if all the teams are ready to start, we can start anytime that you are ready, guys. So if the team government is ready, we can have the Prime Minister to start the debate on the motion that this House believe that the nascent democracies should reduce coverage of the government failures.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay.
Just get the mic a bit closer so we can hear.
Okay, is this good? It's good?
Yeah, yes, now it's good. Yep.
Okay, so wait, I'm gonna set my timer.
Yeah, and lastly, yeah, before we forget, since you make a good point, so I will not be able to time. Anyone can time for us?
I can.
Can anyone take this in charge? Because time
yeah,
is also.
I'll time, not a problem.
Okay, that will be great. Thank you, Tasneem. So without further ado, we call the Prime Minister to deliver their speech.
I think that the most important things when we talk about a new emerging democratic countries or nascent democracies is that it's very important when we create a sense of unity, a sense of solidarity, and working together within different individuals, right? That is to say that this very sensitive information that is resulted from this media are intrinsically harmful to further the process of transition to a democratic country. So what do government stands for, right? Within government, you need to understand that this debate is a third-party perspective debate. That's to say that we need to discuss on what's the best for these new emerging democratic countries. And what we mean by nascent democracies is that these are new emerging democratic countries, things like countries that have endured so long of revolution, war, or armed conflict. What do we mean by reducing this coverage, right? We're going to close exposure that leads to negative reaction of society. That is to say that the failures of governments are going to prove further whether it's completely fine. But lastly, I think that opposition has to defend in a scenario whether media coverage that are strong that leads to divisions and further conflicts is completely fine. So several arguments that I'm going to bring. First of all, I'm going to bring why then stability is something that is inherent and why then media, the information of media harms this. So first of all, you need to understand what are the ideal parameter of a nascent democracy, right? You need to contextualize that these countries are just countries that are new democratic countries that have no obstacle that can build their ideal system of democracy. No, but these countries that have just emerged after a sectarian conflict, years of revolutions or war or bloodless crisis in order for the purpose to fight for democracies. What does it mean? It means that these countries are countries that are still unstable, that still have a huge political turmoil. The politics are still like very, very fragile, right? Their inability and controlling. It means that the ideal way is that we need to ensure that these nascent democracies have their stability and have their a lot of their society able to cooperate from various like democratic factions, for example. This, for example, how the Libyans after the war, they create the GNA to cooperate between different rebel factions. This is exactly when you need to characterize media, right? Because, okay, I think that this debate needs to assume that best case that the media are that objective, why then the information are still harmful. Because when they aim for merely profit, they try to aim the most of their news, their coverage as hyperbolastic as possible, right? They're going to make headlines that criticize particular government policy, for example, or a particular faction that is bad. Their policy, their transition policy is bad, etc., etc. But second of all, we think that how international media portrays that they are sometimes equipped with foreign interests, for example, to counterpart or to control a certain geopolitics in order to topple down a certain interim government. So it's not that the media is bad, but we think that the informations that they portray are pretty much sensitive and harmful. What does it mean? This is exactly when you analyze society in a post-conflict or pre-democratic conditions. The society are still traumatized by conflict. They're easily divided because of irrationality, because of their lack of understanding in political educations, when we're talking about these countries. But second of all, we think that most of societies are still divided by multiple faction groups, means that they're still armed or equipped with weapons. That is to say, given that the lack of education, and rationality about politics, the lack of unity in division, these kind of negative information will further hamper the process of transition of these democratic states. This exactly, right? It harms the process and the reconstructions of the states because you create a much bigger bipartisan society, because it is divided by the media, because it is divided by the opinions that are more likely to portray why then the governments fail and why then you should no longer trust the governments, right? Because of narrative, like for example, like how you portray that, oh, it's better in the age of Gaddafi or it's better in the age of Saddam Hussein, for example. Those kind of narrative are something that creates a sense of war. We think it's worse because the way that they materialize these kind of response is to further the conflict. This is exactly why the Libya democratic process failed, is because of this huge media narrative on how we experienced the second Libyan civil war, right? So second Libyan civil war, right? But lastly, why then the failure of nascent democratic government is something that we can actually tolerate? Because you need to analyze how politicians and elites, that these are first generations of elites and politics. Most probably they fought for democracy themselves. They fought for the revolution. They're the one who toppled the dictators. Means that they don't necessarily have bad intentions in failing the democracy. This is exactly because most of them are activists, most of them are actually pro-democratic politicians. But even if they did failure, we think these failures are something that can be tolerated, and most of it are externalities, because most probably that these are, maybe they're not as educated, and we think it's unfair for you to have expectations like the United States or United Kingdom and a well-established democratic countries. They still have no market confidence, etc., etc. We think that the world in our side is we think that the world in our side is better, because our side we don't show or expose negative or failure. We show confidence, exactly because less controversial issues means there is more sense of hope, more sense of unity that will exist more under our side, because we remove the variable that creates and further the conflicts and war. We think that further is going to be easier under our side for these new government to impose law and order, because the society are not that bipartisan. Therefore, they're more likely to follow this government, right, ladies and gentlemen, right? So lastly, why then, even if they want to say, oh, this is important because the right of information is something that society needs to know, I'm going to prove why then the rights of information is something that is not absolute right. Because you need to understand that at a certain point when those particular rights are being accessed to create much more further harms and national security and harms the collective protections, we think it's completely fine if we limit those. Just as in the current status quo, we don't reveal particular military operations just because we think it's harmful because it's those kind of information being released. We think it's same under our side, right? We think the most important thing is to create unity. So what have we explained to you in this debate? We have explained a couple of things. First, we have explained to you why then stability is something that is inherent to further the process of these democratic states. Secondly, we have told to you why then the reaction of society is something harmful when they receive these kind of informations, and why then it further harms the process of the transitions of these democratic states. We also explained to you why then the comparative under our side is going to be much better because we don't lubricate the society with these controversial issues that further creates war. Lastly, we have explained to you why then the rights of information is not something that validates. Opposition need to explain their burden. Why then, even if these individuals gain these informations, the war are not going to be that extremes, and why then, even though it creates national security, why then it's better. We're very proud to speak on this grand final.
We thank the Prime Minister for his speech, and now to continue the debate, we call upon the leader of opposition to open their debate. Yeah, Team Sudan, are you ready? Can you hear us?
Before I start, can he just repeat the definition of reduction, because I didn't hear it?
But I think that would not be proper because once he finishes the speech, he's not able to continue anymore.
Okay. Then I'll start. Good afternoon. The team of the opposition of the government talked about the importance of protecting sensitive information, and he says that the mechanism that he deals with these type of information that may harm democratic practices is to hide it from the public and not to expose it and debate it to them and prove by reason how we can deal with these information and things. We see that will deepen the problem of establishing democracy in these countries because this information cannot be hidden. There are many social media outlets that can expose this information, and they can merge them with some conspiracy theories and fake news. So we see that it's better to defeat this information, to defeat this news, and to deal with it in the proper way. We have to expose it, debate it, and clarify it to the public. Second, he talked about the political practices in the emerging democracies, and that they are affected by the previous autocratic regimes. We say that it's important for these new political practices to be colored by the principles of democracy, like freedom of speech and freedom of press. And we should not start our democracies by starting an oppressive regime that is going to limit the speech of the people and how they can deal with it, because this will find the foundation for an anti-freedom practice like reduction of speech in media. And we also showed that this is not the best way to do with it. And in fact, this is going to lead to more conspiracy theories going around. He also didn't clearly draw the line on what is those crucial information. He gave an example about military information, which is not exclusive to emerging democracies. Any country which is a democratic or not established democracy or an emerging democracy protects its military information. So it is out of the scope of the debate, and it doesn't relate to this. And without drawing the line clearly, this can be used for the current government to start a new oppressive regime. He also talked about the example of Libya, which he misunderstood. In Libya, there was many tribal conflicts and tribal tensions. Those tensions, if they were hidden, they would be discussed with their tribes leaders alone. So it will not result in more unity. In fact, it will result in more fragmentation of society and of the political practice. So this information should be debated, should be reasoned, and we say that infant democracies should have the maximum amount of freedom of speech and freedom of press to tackle these issues. If they are fake news, to expose it, and if they are real, to know how to deal with it. And in our argumentation, I will say that we are the side that stands with the institutions and building the institutions of democracy, not with the current government. And we rely on the institutions of democracies to keep the democratic practice, the institutions of freedom of press, the institution of reasons, the ways of reasons and thinking and argumentation to do this. And that's why we participate in this debating championship. So first, I will say that this orientation towards reducing freedom of speech and reducing media coverage is anti-democratic and clashes with core democratic principles. As democracy is the rule of the people by people, it has many other principles that are accommodated with it. First is the accountability for those who are ruling the country. If there isn't a free press that is going to show us the failures of this government and how to tackle it and how to direct it, and if there is also and give a chance for the government to show how these failures are going to be dealt with, we are weakening democracy. We are not getting what these emerging democracies want. They want to have accountability for their politicians, and this is going to and they have to have accountability for their politicians, and reducing the media coverage will limit the amount of accountability there is. And if the politician says that, and if the government says that it is in the right side, then it can go out and debate this media coverage and expose how they went wrong and what they went right and what could be done to move to the right direction. So this motion that the House proposes clashes with the principles of democracy and set us to a road to another autocratic regime that started by limiting the practices of the press, and they did not show us how they are going to deal with a media outlet that doesn't abide by their rules. Are they going to shut it? Are they going to do what? So this is a way to start a new road to oppression and controlling rights to speech to people. Second, I will talk about the practicalities of this orientation, because where is the government going to draw the line? Are they going to reduce media coverage? Who is going to choose it? If the government itself will choose it, it may pick and choose things that in its favor. So if it's, for example, wants to assign some judges to courts and such things that may be anti-democratic and will harm these infant democratic institutions, they will want to cover that thing, which will in the long term result in a new autocratic regime and will not help us to build this government. And as we said before, it's better to attack an idea with an idea, not with oppression, not with reducing your right to speech. Because if you are speaking nonsense, speaking fake news, it's better to expose you, not to hide it, because information and ideas cannot be hidden, specifically in this age, because the states and the governments do not have full control of any media outlet. If they control the news and the national TVs, they cannot control the foreign TVs or the social media outlets. And this will also bring us to how they are going to deal with those who do not tackle reduction, how they are going to deal with them, and how will the response will be, because any response can lead through its exaggeration and through the line where it is drawn, it will lead to more oppression of freedom of speech. Second, we will talk about this violation of rights this is a violation of rights of democracy that will make the government more vulnerable to make more mistakes, because if the government knows that it cannot hide anything that it's doing, it cannot hide any part of its failure, it will concentrate on improving these parts and moving it forward, because they want to be elected in the next election cycle. They do not. They will be more accountability, and this is why those people went to have democracy. Mr. Chair, we are the side that believes that democratic institutions and democratic practices like freedom of speech and freedom of press are the ones that result in a democratic society and in democratic political institutions, not giving autocratic tools and autocratic measures like reduction of speech and media coverage to government. Thank you.
We thank the leader of opposition. Now, again, we continue with the proposition, Deputy Prime Minister, to continue the debate.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, let me set my timer first. Hold on. All right, I'm going to start in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. Ladies and gentlemen, sometimes the problem cannot carry the harm, but the reaction towards the problem is it's in and of itself the core of the harm, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm going to advocate in our side of the house is that we are going to advocate into two things. Number one, why then the sensitive information could not be leaked out to public in a form of process of nation democracy. But secondly, I'm going to talk about the nation building and what is the best interest of this nation building in nation democracy to begin with, right? But before I proceed further, I would like to clarify several things out of the leader of opposition. Number one, I think that in our side of the house, we don't have any kind of burden to explain how well this media would eventually not disclose it, be it in a form of crackdown or even banning this media and so on and so forth, because this motion is in and of itself a third-party debate, in whereabouts it's just a value judgment evaluation. What if the like necessary problem is not exposed towards the public, and we show the consequences and why the consequences in and of itself backlashes with the development of nation democracy. Number two, a clarification: if their side of the house, in our side of the house, we don't have any burden to protect any kind of fake news or conspiracy as an alternative. Because if you look at the alternative of social media or conspiracies, dark web, for instances, if it's not clarified by the public media or the conventional media, then those information will be delegitimized anyway. I think that both sides of the house should play under the mechanism that conventional media is that particularly influential to the communities so that it can inform the decision making and what kind of decision that we should take in the future, right? So I'm going to talk about the issues in my speech. All rebuttals will be integrated with my points of argumentations. First argumentation, I'm going to talk about how, the first argumentation, I'm going to talk about how people would react towards the problem and why it is not good for the nation democracy, right? What leader of opposition has came into the debate is that they told to us that right now, nation democratic countries should be accountable in the terms of nation building, right? We want to ask them an accountability. We want to involve individuals on the ground in order for us to construct policies and so on and so forth. There are key aspects of response to this idea. Number one, I think that you should have questioned what kind of problem there exists inside of nation democracy. The problem inside of nation democracy is particularly very unique and could not involve public opinion because it's sensitive policies to with, namely how you deal with security issue during the vacuum of power is that you usually trying to declare martial law in several provinces, for example, or even to ensure stability, we need to have political transaction with past dictator. For instances, like we give them amnesty, we didn't prosecute them, and so on and so forth. It was seen as a form of public failure, but it is much more necessary in that construction to begin with, ladies and gentlemen, right? The unique case out of this is it doesn't stay out of win-win because it always creates a criminalization of one part of communities towards another parts of community. Namely, things like military operation, for example, sacrifices the freedom of several provinces in order for us to decrease further insurgency in these nation democracies, right? But secondly, I'm going to talk about how public will react in towards the problem that exists in the status quo. There are several key aspects, right? Number one, I think that my first speaker already told to you that how people in nation democracy would most likely react into our problem is that there are three possibilities. Now, I think that public inside of like nation democracy have no prior political education, right? Like those things, like people only habituated to live inside of dictatorship. People do not have any kind of agency to channel their anger. Namely, public infrastructure or political infrastructure such as parliament, inspectorate, commissioner, who are like the tools of check and balance, isn't established in that day. So how does the public would alternate their anger if they are knowing the problem that exists? Number one, there would be a much more unsubstantial discussion. This is the best case scenario. For instances, they come with no solution, but most likely trying to blame another ethnic group or even a particular group that has past grievances or past ties with the, like the past government to begin with. This is what happens in Iraq, right? In 2004, the moment when there is a failure in economic rejuvenation, how is the Shiite group to failure in economic rejuvenation? How in 1999 in Indonesia, the moment when there is a failure in economic rejuvenation, most of Indonesian indigenous are trying to blame the Chinese minority because they are the part of a core problem inside of these cases, ladies and gentlemen. But number two, I'm going to talk about the worst case scenario is that individuals on the ground are still armed to the teeth because of past revolution action, right? Namely, at this point, how people would channel their public anger is that they were less likely to use points of discussion, but using direct violence by guns, for instances. Guns violence or even fighting another tribes, such as what happened in Libya. Namely, Zintan and Misrata, for example, are blaming each other for economic failure in Western Libya. This is what kind of cases that happens in the end of the day. But second issue I'm going to talk about is talking about the nation building. Why then it is worse if we disclose the problem that is unsolvable towards the communities on the ground. Number one, it prolongs the fight of sectarian group inside of community. And it draws up lots of pessimism towards the newly democratic system that is created. Because in post-revolution, people are still live in a romanticization of past dictatorship, namely because things like stability, namely because things like security benefit, like we miss Saddam Hussein, we miss Suharto, because there are a lot of economic stability that my life are easier back then. Because inside of nascent democracy, the problem is that a lot of things are not going to be perfect, ladies and gentlemen. You still need to have to acquire market confidence, for example, like your economics right now is jeopardizes because it is still a time for conflicts and so on and so forth. But the consequences, if you involve public in the terms of decision making and leaking, like sensitive information, then the reaction would be fighting one and another. At this point, stability would start, and also economic rejuvenation would less likely to happen in the end of the day. What is the comparative in our side of the house? Number one, I think that we can delay those political discussion in the future, right? When the time is already conducive. Because right now, when people are still irrational, when people are still much in a euphoria and also stuck inside of crisis, they are less likely to be rational. In Indonesia, for example, how we changed our constitution after the revolution took 4 years, because we wait how people would stabilize, because we wait how the parliamentary would establish, because we wait how then the inspectorate would be established first, so that people can channel out their political ideas in better way. By those reasons, I'm so proud to close my case. Thank you so much.
We thank the Deputy Prime Minister, and now to continue the debate on the opposition side, we call upon the Deputy Leader of Opposition.
I think he unintendedly left, or his connection is having a problem. Can you please let him back in, our second speaker?
He is not here. Okay, then.
He needs to be added back in.
He is in the waiting room now. He is here. He's here. Yeah. He was in the waiting room.
Yes, I'm here. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, am I audible right now?
Yes, you are audible, Mr.
Yes.
Sami. We can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, let me set up my timer. Or should I start right now, right?
Anytime that you're ready, you are able to go.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. We are today here to stand against reducing the media coverage for nascent democracies, for the government failures. We will start directly by asking some questions which we were waiting the prepositions to answer, and then I will be giving my arguments, and the rebuttaling will be integrated inside my arguments. First of all, we are asking for how long and which conditions. Who should do this reduction, the government or the media, or the media optionally should do this? How you will ensure that they will not use this against democracy itself? How you will ensure that people will not go to outside media for the enemy's medias? How you will practice, you practically do this in the existence of social media? How do you protect the value of democracy, freedom, and transparency? How do you correct government failure if you cover it and reduce its coverage? How you will ensure that government will not abuse this to support the whole democracy? And how government and population will be victims and they will not be violating this democracy? And does democracy means specific government and persons to cover their failures, or it's for all population? And to start with, you are covering the wound and you are giving painkiller instead of treating and seeing the real problem, and you are leading us to loss of the organ and even death, and will be explaining this in my upcoming arguments and doing some comparison between our case and their case. We started by saying that this clashes with the democracy, and the most important thing is in democracy is freedom and transparency, and this is the core of democracy. So their side is not justified at all to take this democracy, and this is guide us to the harm which comes to democracy, to government, to population in building a state. When you are reduce the coverage of government failure, you are harming the government by not holding them accountable and not being transparent with the population, and they will lose their trust with the population. One more thing, the government need to see the defects and to prioritize them when they are having some pressure from the media, and they will be receiving solutions when they are putting these failures in the ground. And here we have to be very sure about the difference between sensitive information and failure. Sensitive information doesn't mean failure, so the preposition try to mix between sensitive information and a failure. Here we are talking about failure that exists, taking place, and we have to correct this, and this coming by uncover this failure in front of the people. And here we have to say that population and people who went and came with this democracy should be part of this corrective measures and to say their opinions in failure. And now the reaction of society that they are talking about, they are assuming that the people who came with this democracy, they are silly and they are not trusting the government, and they are against the democracy, which is the freedom of speech and the transparency that should take place in. Reaction of society, they assume that when we are giving these failures in front of people, directly the society and the population who came with this democracy and who came with this government will be against it. And this is not the case. The case is these people will support the government to solve their these problems and will stand with them. And you can see the initiatives that taking place in every country. They gave the reason of the example of Libya, and we know that Libya, the crisis in Libya is because of intervention from outside countries, and this is out of our scope in this debate. The reverse is that when people and population and society know lately that people, they are reducing covering of failures and try to cover failures, they will be disappointed and they will lose trust and will see this government as violating their human rights of free speech. They are not transparent and they are not giving freedom for media to cover the whole thing in the exact manner. We are talking about building a state in this critical moment. So building a good state and building a strong state means that we have to uncover all failures and to correct the failure and to face our problems, government and population together bravely, and to start to reconstruct and to rework. Here we have to be very clear that they are stand as a pro-government. We are in pro-government and pro-democracy at the same time, because for democracy, we are advocating for freedom. We are advocating for building institutions in a good quality, in a correct way by recorrecting the failures. And we are starting for the in the pro-government, and we would like to to show the government their failures, to get them to correct it by the support of the people who stand behind this government, who stand behind this democracy, and ensuring democracy and freedom of speech and media will ensure more democracy. One more thing we have to state is that media now, it's a fourth authority, and it's a part of ruling the country by saying this is right, this is wrong, and by reflecting what people the priorities of people and what the failures that affecting the people. So to wrap up, I would like to mention that people started this democracy and they are part of this democracy, and democracy came by multi-parties, and all these parties should stand behind the democracy, and unity come by standing behind the democracy, and stability come by ensuring more democracy, more freedom of speech. And this is the reason why people previous regime. One more thing we have to stress is that the reducing the coverage from government failures which exist, we are not talking about sensitive information, is not justified, and it have harmful impact, as we mentioned, harm impact in government, in population themselves, in building the states, and in the media itself. And one more thing is that it's not justified. It doesn't have an impact. And the mechanism is not clear for which kind of failures you as preposition will not cover, which types of failures you will cover, when you will get to back coverage of these failures, under which condition, how you will be assessing this democracy. So we are totally against taking the democracy by saying that we are reducing the coverage of government failures, and by this you are harming the government, you are harming the democracy in the first place, and at the end of the day you are losing the democracy, and you are losing the sacrifice of the people. So we are proudly opposed.
So we thank, if you are done, we thank the Deputy Leader of Opposition. And now we have to continue debate with our last speaker, constructive speaker from the government side, the government whip. Are all the team members here in the room for both sides, proposition and the opposition?
Opposition is here.
How about the government? All the team members here?
Affirmative is here.
Okay, perfect. So without further ado, we call upon the government whip to continue their case.
Quick clarification. Number one, I think it's tiring when our opposition always talk about technicality of media. They keep bringing fact about social media outlet outside there, in which that thing included inside proposition fiat that they should not question. But second, opposition also misunderstand to the motion. We only reduce the information and the content. We do not close like literally all the informations of media. So it's too excessive where they claim we are new authoritarian system. If the problem is that small and fixable, we are more than willing to disclose it to people because we have no problem within that. But we want to hide failure that requires us give a lot of money, a lot of compensation, and takes a long time. And we do not have time, we do not have resources to appease them all. So I think it is clear. So I think opposition whip need to engage to the real stance of proposition. I have 3 questions in my speech. First question, how we react to freedom of speech and transparency that opponent teams always glorify. I think you as adjudicator cannot give them winning only within classical argument about freedom of speech. 3 reasons. First reason, in our side, we still grant right to vote. We still grant right to exercise diversity of culture and belief in your home, for example. Why then reducing this content suddenly make us become dictatorship that takes away the freedom of speech of people? We do not hear enough elaboration. Second response, we give you enough counter principle saying right to know can be limited when it comes to utilitarian value of democracy. That's why we have executive meeting in parliament That's why we have minister to create exclusive meeting in the parliament. So we provide you enough counter principle to them. Thirdly, we are the only team who explain freedom of speech is important. That's why we do not limit it for the forever, for the lifetime. When the system is well established, we give them all. When the political education is much more free, we give them all information because they can rationalize it by their own. But when you want to make this issue become deadlocks, I will give you 2 questions as a valid tipping point. Why then you should give us winning? Second question, how about the structural incentive for the leader? Affirmative gives you claim saying the leader is benevolent and failure comes to them. Opposition gives you claim saying the failure is internally evil intention by the leader. They are abusive, they are dictator. Sorry, I have a lot of things to say. How then this class goes to proposition? 2 reasons. First of all, you can judge this incentive structure based on likelihood. We are clearly characterized the one that chosen to become leader is the one who sacrificed everything against dictatorship for democracy. They lose their family. They lose their beloved one during war for establishing democracy. Meanwhile, opposition provides you no likelihood to back their claim. Why? Every leader is that evil and equally same within dictatorship. Second response, even if the leader themselves has less incentive, we give you other measure to make it balanced. 1, when you become democratic country, you engage to international deal with other country. Thus, another country as your partner will push you to remain equal because they are inherently attached within you economically and politically. Second, when you become democratic, we talk about democratic aid from United States. We talk about democratic assistance from European Union. We talk about help from United Nations to regulate the system of democracy. Within this, it makes you cannot easily believe within their claim saying we would have new autocratic system and all the leader is that bad. So because we bravely enough to play in our worst case scenario, they also need to play in their worst case scenario. What if our leader is that good? Why then it intrinsically harms when we reduce the information in which they do not have the answer? Last question, even if at best opposition can fix everything, why then if we play in their best case scenario, like society will push government in polite way, for example, does lead into changes, why then their changes still harmful for opposition? 2 response. Number 1, in dictatorship country, we have a lot of opposition in which they are not united. In the point when we become democracy, we just choose one oppositional party to rule the nation. So when we disclose one mistake done by government, maybe society will impeach the government and replace it by candidate coming from other opposition party, in which when the new one elected, the other will try to make it down because they have inability to also regulate everything due to lack of experience. So basically they will tackle one and another for self-interest in a politics. At best, you make the transitional process to democracy will take 1,000 years. At worst, we would end up like Libya, like Armenia, like Egypt, in which we are failing to do transition in democracy. Second, maybe society push not for changing the government, but for pushing new changes. Look, when society receives information in which they're still unable to process it, it is very natural to say that they will opt in into vigilante group, opt in into undemocratic riot, because we cannot expect people who know democracy like literally yesterday suddenly know how to create petition, know how about bureaucracy. So why then at best, the undemocratic riot leads to policy, why then it's bad? First harm, maybe government will retaliate using undemocratic military force as well. But second harm,
point of information,
maybe government will not become aggressive, but government will create a bunch of unfinished policy to satisfy the riot. Maybe government will create a rationally high amount of economic incentive to satisfy mass. but it takes away the spending for education. It takes away the spending for building political system and ecosystem, and all the things that hinder us to reach the stability. So in all scenario, giving the information and create a reaction leads to hindering us to reach the stability of democracy. Because of this reason, Indonesia deserves to win. Thank you.
We thank the government whip, and now to continue their debate, we call upon their opposition whip to close the substantive speaking part. So, opposition whip.
Is my voice clear?
Yes, Osama, we can hear you clearly.
Okay, just a second. Let me organize my papers.
Sure.
Let me set my timer. I'm also sorry. Thomas Jefferson, since we're speaking about nascent democracies, who was the third president of the United States, the greatest democracy known to people today, said the only security for all is in a free press. Is in a free press that is not reduced, that is not governed, that is not overlooked by the government in what it has the right to share or it doesn't have the right to share. We know that the democracy is governed by four main powers, which is the executive, the legislative, the judicial, and the fourth is the media power. The media power that overlooks this government and that tells it which way to go if it doesn't see, and that reflects the actions of the government to the people so they can then overlook the actions of the government that they have elected and that they have sacrificed to bring. So I believe the minimum right that they have is to know what's going on so as to decide what they want to do next. I think it would have been easier for the prop side today to debate for dictatorship. There's an ongoing debate about which one is easier, dictatorship or democracy. Since you don't believe that the people know what they're doing, since you don't believe that the people know what's best for them, since you assume the ignorance in the nation that brought this democracy, the nation that sacrificed for this democracy to happen, then why are you giving them democracy in the first place? We hear them telling us about a system of bureaucracy where they have a parliament and where the leader is benevolent and where they can make the best decision regardless of what the nation knows and what the nation doesn't know. What is the difference between you and between the Chinese Communist Party, for example, the one that has a benevolent leader and that has a huge bureaucratic system that makes institutionalized decisions without going back to the people? This is just trying to sugarcoat dictatorship in nice words, telling us that they're not going to tell them sensitive information, that they're not going to tell them, that they're not going to allow the media to criticize decisions. They tell us at one stance of the debate that they're just evaluating a value from a third party view, and that they're not going to get down to the practicality of the debate, even though they're debating the consequences. If you're telling us about the consequences, these are the consequences of an action. Tell us what the action is, so then we can evaluate what are the consequences of this action. We ask them to clarify the practical way of actually stopping the media from doing this. We ask them about the effect of the social media that is existent these days, that has resulted in the past 20 years in the bringing up of many democratic systems, like the democratic system in Sudan, like the democratic system in many countries. And still they tried to disregard it and keeping out of the debate, which shows us that they try to sugarcoat and pick the things that they believe stand in their side while disregarding the rest of the facts and the rest of the things that are happening in the rest of the world. First, let's start with their misinterpretations. They misinterpreted failures for security info, telling us about military info, while a few seconds later, they were telling us that the media will be criticizing decisions or exposing failures. Which one are you talking about? I believe we're talking about exposing failures, and we're not here to disclose all security information to the entire nation. Matters of national security that are very sensitive and that has to do with military info and with protection of the country differ from failures that came along from decisions that the government made. And then they tried to mix it up with foreign media, and that the foreign media will want to topple down the system. And this is not really included because we know the government has no control whatsoever over foreign media unless they want to take it to a new level of dictatorship where they shut down all sorts of internet and shut down all sorts of connection to the outside world, kind of like South Korea, which is where they bring out their real face. They tell us that they're not well-established democracies and people will go back to dictatorships and romanticize them, like hearing the narrative that Saddam Hussein had good days. We know that this happens long years after the dictator is actually gone, when people who have not necessarily lived the days of this dictator come to life, and then they hear about how life was in the past, and they see pictures that romanticize this past without knowing the atrocities that happened in the time of this dictator. They also assume that the democracy is only tied to the current government. We're not here to protect the government. We're not here to protect the current system. We're here to protect the entire democracy system. So you're either pro-democracy on this debate or pro-government. We are pro-democracy because we believe even if this government fails, even if this government goes away, the people will be able to vote a better government, a government that better suits their ambitions. They believe that this government is the only benevolent government, and if this government goes away, another government will come, and it will not be able to sustain, and it will not be able, no thank you, and it will not be able to withhold in this life. So what are you telling us? Are you telling us that the government is some sort of training academy where we set people so they can learn how to do politics and they can learn how to run a country? Or are you telling us that people in governments deserve to be given prolonged periods of time so they can practice their failures and then later go back on the right path? It doesn't work that way. Simply first, because political parties have been ruling before. It's definitely not their first experience in politics. They don't need to learn by practice. They can learn from the experiences of others. And with the help of the people, if you fully disclose everything that's going on to the people, ask them what they want to do, give them representative bodies that really reach out with their opinions and tell them with full transparency, here's what's going on, here's the problem. This is how democracy functions. Because then, even if something happens, even if the consequences are bad, we don't assume that this nation is ignorant, because a nation that's ignorant doesn't go out to demand its right to freedom of speech. It doesn't go out to demand its right to live in a democracy. So their attempts to downplay all these factors and to picture this image or this narrative where people are ignorant, where governments are the benevolent, and where governments deserve a chance to do and to give it all their shots before they're taken down, before they're actually asked about what they have done and what they are going to do in the near and in the far future. And I think maybe we should take a look at India, one of the most populous democracy in the world today, where literally the houses of the media officials who have been proposing things against the government and who have been criticizing the governments are being raided today. We should look at the US, where Donald Trump is having an excessive raid on many media outlets and on many social media outlets, where he tried to literally have an executive order go against Twitter because Twitter has been banning some of his tweets due to public regulations that go on everyone, because he believes he's benevolent, just like the opposite proposition believes today. So this is a world where Thomas Jefferson started by saying that the only security for all is in a free press. In that country, in that comparative, in our comparative, we still somehow got here because of other mistakes. Now, dear ladies and gentlemen, imagine the comparative of the proposition. If we start off from the beginning by reducing the freedoms, by cutting down these freedoms, by giving them the chance to decide what the media outlet has the right to say, what the media outlet does not have the right to say, imagine where we're going to get 100 or 200 years from now. This is if the democratic system goes on anyway, because with the way that they have been treating it, giving the priority to the government, not the people, assuming the benevolence and the knowledge to the leader, not to the people, I don't think it's going to last for a long time. Soon enough, we'll probably fall back to the real autocratic system, which happened a lot in the near history in Sudan. And lastly, we would like to say that when people really sacrifice for something, they would be careful to keep it. They would want to know everything that's happening to it. They will work tirelessly to make it succeed and to make it work, like what we are seeing in Sudan. People are pushing the government in this transitional period, even though it's been going through a lot of failures and a lot of difficulties, because the government has been fully disclosing everything that's going on. It hasn't been keeping any facts away from them. And lastly, I end up with a quote that says, democracy is when the people keep a government in check. We want to keep the government in check to keep our democracy. We are pro-democracy. We are not pro-government. And thank you.
We thank the government, the opposition whip. And now to conclude the debate from the opposition side, we call upon the opposition reply speech. Who is going to do the concluding statements from you guys? Mazin, okay. Mazin, anytime that you are ready to go, you have 4 minutes of speech to conclude.
Before we start with the closing statements, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
The polls are open now. for our viewers. You can find the links of the polls to decide for our viewers to decide the winning team. You can find it from the Facebook and YouTube accounts of ICYF for the polls. So this is like a little reminder for our viewers to, if they want to vote, they can find the link from the comment section. Thank you.
Okay, those who want to vote for their favorite side, please follow the links on the comment side. Now, without further ado, we call upon the opposition to give their reply speech.
Mr. Chair, I guess that both teams on both sides agree that we should work to preserve this democracy in infant democracies. Let us imagine two emerging democracies, one that guarantees freedom of speech to its maximum limit and freedom of press, and one that implements what the government team has been saying, and debate how this is going to go. First, we talked about the principle of democracy, which is ruled by the people for people, and this implies the trust that people are going to account their politicians. But the government team is actually giving a point that is the autocratic argument, which is that people may not choose the right things to do. If you do not trust in people's choice, why are you giving them a democracy in the first place? Second, we talked about that clashes with the principles of free speech, and they only try to mitigate it by comparing it to military information. And we told them that military information is not related to this scenario, because military operations are classified information in every democracy, if it's emerging or not. And then we showed them the difficulty in implementing such an orientation, that there are a lot of media news that are out of the reach of the state, like social media and others, and they downplayed their effect, which in fact, social media is in the last 10 years are the main responsible source of news for those transitioning periods that led to these emerging democracies. So I do not know how they can downplay a source that resulted in the democracies that they are trying to protect. We also gave them what would happen to the rise of those other parties and other groups that participated in bringing the democratic transition, and how they are going to deal with this violation of their rights in the democracies they tried to build. They didn't respond to this point, and they gave examples that they didn't understand correctly and didn't understand the context they operated in. The examples of Libya, which we told them that if this information, which were not military information, which were discussed by those tribes individually, if they were exposed at the national level, they would have been debated and resulted in a better answer to these questions. And we also showed them how foreign intervention played its role there. And the example of Iraq, actually the government were oppressing the right of the opposition to appear in media and to debate and to argue. That's why they turned to guns. So freedom of speech is the protection for democracy against guns. And I don't know how they are trying to make people learn the democratic practices by limiting their freedom of speech, freedom of expression. This orientation, we showed them that it's anti-democratic, and it's going to have a huge effect in the building of democratic institutions in these countries. So, Mr. Chair, if you can choose one of these countries to live in, a country in an emerging democracy which has a full right of freedom of speech, that trust you as a citizen and give you your information that you deserve if you live in an established democracy, would you choose to live in this free country, or would you choose a country that you will depend on the benevolence of those politicians who are currently in the government to ensure that the government will run smoothly? And lastly, they went from and to what is a government failure and what is not, and they haven't debated the exact same motion correctly. And thank you.
We thank the opposition for their reply speech. And now, to conclude the debate, we call upon the government to give their concluding statements or reply speech.
Check. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
All right. Hold on. I'll set my timer first.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to start in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. Ladies and gentlemen, just what I tell to you before, the core of harm does not always lies on the problem, but it lies on the reaction towards the problem in and of itself. Our side have proven is out the greater good in preserving the future democracy in and of itself. We have argued and advocate that the presence of democracy could not work without a stable state, that the presence of democracy could not work if there is still armed conflict on the ground. We think that limiting the information towards the present problem that is in and of itself, one, pretty much unsolvable. Number two, solvable but sensitive towards society on the ground because it's not a win-win solution. It's necessary to maintain stability and for the long run for nascent democracy in and of itself. I'm going to talk about two things in my speech. Clarification will be intertwined. First issue, I'm going to talk about how sensitive is the government failure and why it cannot be exposed to public. Number one, we think that the problem is pretty much sensitive. In the terms of nation building and nascent democracy, the problem that evolves around those nations are pretty much complex. With the economic crisis that results to confidence in the market in and of itself. To this point, to make governance easier to tackle the problem is that we don't reforce society to build and contribute towards the discourses that happens to be on the ground. Several key aspects why we can justify our point. Number one, because the presence of society are still irrational in the terms of contributing political opinion, namely because they are not habituated with political system, namely because they are living inside a past dictatorship that goes in arm and guns in solving the direct problem in and of itself, right? But number two, there is still politicization that happens to be on the ground, both from the opposition and also from the past dictator, for example. And it results into not so substantive discourses that it results into things like enemy and also rivalities in between sectarian group in the end of the day. The end outcome of this is that your nation is less likely to stabilize in the end of the day because of those problems that you exposed earlier, so that it create another problem and it create another problem, so that your nation will eventually not going to be stabilized in any sense. Number two, in the terms of nation building, what will we look like in our side of the house is that we don't advocate for dictatorship, but somehow there is a necessary democratic rights that needs to be balanced out in order for a greater public goods. For example, we have already told you that certain information is carried out to be super sensitive, that public reaction is less likely going to be substantive to solve any kind of problems to begin with, ladies and gentlemen. We have talked to you about several things, right? Number one, that the post-revolution society are still irrational, right? Number two, there is no certain institution that would carry it out and also voice out their grievances directly, because right now governments still have a lot of diversity of problems that they should take care about in this kind of cases. Namely, if individuals right now didn't get any kind of satisfaction environment, they create stabilization, like riots or even anything that would channel out through their public anger. In this kind of cases, why then it is better for us to close this problem and let it be solved by professional. Namely, in our side of the house, who will solve the problem are the professional leader, are those who are in charge, are those who are already educated in negotiation and political discussion. Rather than involving public, for example, it is better to criticize later on when the individuals on the ground already rational, when economic rejuvenation there and people are satisfied with their stomach in the end of the day, so that they won't channel out their anger towards public to things like destabilization that will eventually creating failure in establishing the national democracy inside of this nation state. By all of those reasons, I'm gladly to close the last speech of OIC debate 2020. Thank you so much and good luck for both teams.
We thank the both teams for the great debate. Virtually cross floor, shake hands and wait for our verdict. As we said, the voting is available for those who are watching us online. It's available on the comment section, both in Facebook and YouTube.
Yes.
And now we will have our own deliberation for the verdict.
Before
to NSB. Yes.
Yeah, before we close, thank you very much, Mr. Defrim, and thank you very much for the both teams for excellent debate. I can say that probably our judge will have a really hard time to decide who is going to be the winner of the first OIC Youth Debate Championship. So I would like to congratulate for the team Indonesia and the team Sudan for putting out really logical and brilliant arguments for today's debate championship. And as a reminder, we have our closing ceremony at 5:30 GMT +3, which is Turkey time, and we are going to announce the winners of the first OIC Youth debate championship in our closing ceremony. Inshallah, now we are about to close our session, and right after we close, our judges will go for their meeting, and they will try to decide the winners of the our program until we start the closing ceremony. So thank you all for your contribution. Thank you all for your efforts, and thank you our judges for their time and their dedicated contribution for our program. And of course, thank you to our viewers. I can say I have seen we had more than 100 viewers on Facebook and almost 25-30 viewers on YouTube. They were live watching it live, your debates, and I can say that it was one of the highest number that I've seen so far for our live sessions. So congratulate both teams again and again, and thank you all for participating, and see you soon in, I think, in 2 hours. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and see you. Bye bye.